All right. So let me welcome Ed Jacobs back to the Open G Records podcast. We've known Eddie for a long time now. We are seeing Eddie, which is delightful. It's always funny when I look at these things. I'm trying to look directly at my camera, but then when I want to look at you to acknowledge you, I'm looking somewhere off screen, which is delightful.
Uh-huh.
So it's having that conversation is always odd, but it is what it is. So listen, we did a podcast before where I talked to you about where you grew up, what your influences were. And so if people are interested in that, you can go back on OpenG Records and look at that. But this is more of a conversation about a project that Eddie and I are nearing the end of. Let's see the dog. You got to bring the dog in. If we're going to hear the dog, we
Okay,
got to see
come
the
come
dog.
on up here, Frankie. Come on up. Come on up. There's a special request to see you. You got to be on camera.
Actually, I like the view without you better, if that's.
There we go. Is that better?
No, no, just remove yourself entirely. So, so we should say that you were in what, Surf City? Is that where?
I'm in Surf City for the
North
first time
Carolina.
since Hurricane Florence hit in fall of 2018. We finally got back in here last week. It's been a long hiatus.
Yeah, as many of you know, Eddie teaches at East Carolina University, which is what, about an hour and 15 from the coast or something like
Actually,
that.
about 2 hours from here. Yeah.
And so one of the great joys of actually living in Eastern North Carolina, of which there are only a few, is being close enough to the beach that you can get away. And since you actually have a place at the beach to get away to, not having been there for a couple of years, I bet it's pretty sweet to be sitting out there today. I can
Yeah.
definitely see why you're doing that. If I could
Yeah.
do it myself and have a good internet connection, I'd sit in my back and then you could just see fucking snow the whole time. I mean, there's just like, it's like when I lived in Michigan, it snows and then it never gets above 32 degrees. And so then the next snow comes and it just piles on top of that. Saul built like this 5 foot tall megalith in the back or monolith in the backyard. And it's just getting massive because every snowstorm comes, it just piles another
It
eight
just
inches on
piles on
top of
top
the
of
damn
it.
thing. It's
Yeah.
gonna. I swear that pile of snow is gonna last until mid-June or so. um, so the project that we're finishing, Ed, with you and me, and mostly you, is an album-length recording of pieces that you wrote over the course of just over 20 years. Um, and besides our long-term relationship that I'll get into a lot actually coming up. When we were working on the program notes for the album, um, they really lead with, end with, and the meat of it is all about relationships. Relationships for the people for whom you wrote pieces. A couple of examples of that are on this record. Um, I just wanted you to talk sort of freeform a little bit about what the importance of those personal relationships has been in your life, particularly in making art art together.
I think when I think back to, as I'm sure you do as well, when I think back to the special element involved in making us want to do music when we were kids, um, there's something really both special and ephemeral and transcendent about making sound with another person. It's one thing to sit there and practice your technique, and of course feel the satisfaction of improving or fixing the problem or developing enough skill to recognize a problem and then how to fix it. Um, but the act of making music with other people and that different kind of communication. For me, it wasn't generally in sort of big ensembles like bands and things like that. It was more in small jazz ensembles, just jamming, just spending time at people's houses or them over my house and freely improvising sound together. That's what made me want to do this thing of making music broadly defined. So that's at the core of everything, as far as I'm concerned, that drives me to want to compose. Um, and the next step, of course, is having a particular person who says, "I kind of like what you do. Would you make some of that for me?" And that then creates an opportunity to enrich a relationship um, in new ways, and to bring some sketches to someone and say, I would love to hear you act this part. I would love to hear you create this kind of drama. How do you feel about it? I remember, for instance, writing for you on more than one occasion, and taking something for you and having you react, whether it was, your particular laugh or your particular, oof, this is hard. I love it. Keep
I think there
going,
was a
or
lot of that.
whatever the case
Actually, I have
is.
some Fireball with me today, and I was going to use it on times when we swore, but I'm going to start I'm going to have a small one. Oh, see, that's much more high class.
Okay.
That's like
This is actually this. This ties right into what we're
we'll
talking
like
about.
do a small
So
half a
another.
shot.
Okay. Well, I don't have a shot glass, and I'm not
All
going
right,
to pour a half a. I'm not
all
going to
right.
pour 8 ounces. So, but this
Well,
this Koval actually pours right into what I'm talking about. The part of what I've been doing in Gesundheit, L'chaim, yeah,
L'chaim.
yeah.
It's been a long time.
It really is good. One of the things I've done is making, creating concerts. This festival down in North Carolina, and the relationships that come out of having guest artists come and just hanging with them. Sometimes
Right,
I end up writing for them,
right.
sometimes not. And this
Well,
was a gift from the folks in Chicago, Dal Niente, Ensemble Dal Niente. The harpist Ben Melsky sent me three of these. I guess these are all distilled in Chicago, so which is where they are.
I
So
see.
he sent me these.
Very
Another
nice.
good relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, good relationships have side benefits to them that don't always reveal themselves at first glance. It reminds me, when you talked about doing our piece, like you've written a couple of pieces for me, but the one that I carry the closest is called Oral History. We did it on the record, my debut CD. But the thing about me that I don't know how other players work with you. I don't give direction at all. Like I refuse really to give any direction whatsoever because what I think of is that um, I really have this belief that genius comes from singular sources, and the more committee work, it may be just the fact that I hate committee work as much as I do, but the more committee work that's involved in doing something, the less good it is for me, because I find things that are pure to be the most beautiful. So I don't know that we ever really changed anything that you wrote for me
No,
because
you were really bad about that. Actually, you never gave input for me to change things.
see, I consider that
But
being good at it, not
yeah,
bad
yeah,
at
yeah,
it. Like I'm good
yeah.
about that. See, I mean, it really depends because some composers want that direction. Like, what kind of piece do you want from me? I don't give a fuck at all. It's just
Right,
like I just want you to write what you write, and then my problem is to figure it out, which
right.
sometimes with you has been somewhat problematic. But that is like that's the risk. That's the risk. I've done that to every composer, but too much of my chagrin to just say you write and I'll figure it out.
Right.
I don't know that. Oh, there's my dog.
That
Hello.
is yours.
Hey,
Yeah.
what's up? She thinks there must be food up here because my son was just up here playing Minecraft, so there could
Well,
be.
then I'm sure she's right.
So, and that ties in. Sorry, I'm monopolizing the conversation, but it just reminds me of it ties into when you and I were making things together in North Carolina. Because we should back up and say that those of you who don't know us, um, Eddie teaches at East Carolina University, which is in North Carolina, part of the UNC system. And I taught there with Eddie from 2001 to 2011. And we made a bunch of stuff together, and including the sort of touchstone piece that I talked about. And so when I think about creating that stuff with you, I do think about sort of the dearth of other things to do in Eastern North Carolina, and how cathartic it is to find a kindred soul who wants to make strange things in the middle of somewhere
A
that
desert.
is straight out of 1957. Like
Uh-huh.
basically, it's a very old school, traditional, frankly Republican end of the state, and that was part of the joy of making it with you, is having like a kindred soul out there, like tripping the light
Feel the same.
fantastic in the red sea that it exists in.
Hmm. Well, I feel the same. Every piece that I think about that that has a special place in my heart is something that I wrote for someone, and the pieces I wrote for you are great examples of that, because they are an attempt to write for who who I think you are, as a musician and a personality.
I
Um,
actually think that that's really close to old classical music, in the sense that these composers were writing for their friends, on the whole, or themselves. But there was a lot more of the hang involved, and I think intrinsically in your music, because most of it is sort of small forces, um, and sort of the way that you have um, to really count and throw yourself into the action of your piece. There's the hang is implied, like there is an importance of that level of communication and kind of common work that is just different in small ensemble pieces than it is when you're playing with an orchestra with a conductor in front of you who's telling you where the beats are.
right. It's interesting. I've had um, some of the relationships that have evolved through pieces have been exactly for the person I've written it for, and sometimes a relationship with a particular piece evolves with someone who has then taken up the piece, and not the person I wrote it for. Of course, one good example of that is A Function of Memory, the clarinet and tape piece, um, that I wrote for someone else, and you took it up and made it yours in a really great way. Um, and another example of that is The Line Between, which is on this project, which was written on commission from a colleague, a fabulous musician and singer. But in fact, the recording is by Amanda Gregory, who took it up and connected with the piece in an emotional way that is just fabulous. And so there's an example of actually um, meeting someone,
Hmm.
creating a new relationship,
Hmm.
rather than the relationship it was necessarily written for. Um, in some ways, the cello and tape piece El Momento is similar. I wrote it for Kelly Mickelson, and we had a very good working relationship. And now it's recorded by Chris Gross, with whom I have developed already, a long-standing
Hmm.
relationship before he even picked this piece up. And the same, of course, with Sharon and Stephen, for whom I've written. So it's really kind of cool to see, the relationships you build and then you write for, or the ones that come afterwards. But it's all about these relationships.
Yeah, and in fact, those three people that you just mentioned, Steve Beck, Sharon Harms, and Chris Gross, are part of now my circle in New York and are my first calls um, for concerts that I produce in the
Yeah.
city. So it's interesting how sort of these concentric circles kind of wind themselves together, and then there's one circle, and it's just like it somebody, especially like Chris Gross, who's the cellist, who, that a person like that is worth their weight in gold. High CC, it's worth their is worth
He's
their weight
amazing.
in gold because as a professional musician, a person shows up and they're nice and have done their homework and are always like ready to go, knows the notes, makes changes as needed without ego. Uh, that's the crux of a good hang musically for me. And it could be Beethoven that we're playing, it could be your stuff that we're playing, and the same level of care and musicianship and ethics, really, when you get down to it, being a really ethical
Yep.
player. And I think all of the people on the recording that are that class of musician, and that's like speaks to you more than you probably think that it does. Um,
Well, they have it just their integrity is so solid. Um, in any context I've worked with any of them, I've just been so darn impressed. And you feel um, to have something you've written and you sort of dreamed these sounds, and then have someone with that kind of integrity show up in the studio and make you believe that they understand it, they believe in it, they want to, bring it to life, and then they just do it. It's just incredible. I remember sitting during the recording of Addressing Wonder, in the studio, and Adam just saying, "Oh my God, what is with these people? They're just so good."
we
And
should
that's
name
it. I
check
mean,
Adam Abeshouse, who was
yes,
the recording engineer and is in the midst of
no
finishing the.
better.
Yeah, he's finishing the final mix and master, and that'll be amazing. And then we'll be producing and presenting your record on the Ides of March, which I just like that date.
But,
It's the day before my mom's birthday. It always reminds me of my mom. I almost put it on my mom's birthday, but the Ides of March fall on a Monday this year, and I was like, it's just too good. It's got to be the 15th.
as opposed
But
to Pi
again,
Day.
with Adam, it's another cog in the wheel of being a recording engineer who is also an exquisite hang. It's like
Musician, yeah.
yes, and a great musician with crazy ears. And we're old enough now. I just turned 50. You're what, 10 years older than I.
I just turned 60. Yeah.
We're of a vintage where you don't really have time for bullshit. Like it's just not. Oh, that was the word. Sorry, bullshit was the word.
Well, see, now I got to pour more.
Um, I took a sip because I'm trying to be professional here. Um, I'm failing mostly. Um, I forget where I was with that. It doesn't even matter.
Well, just Adam, and a great musician, and
Yeah,
not having time to
yeah. The ego
work
is
with less.
when you're work, but also just like people have the impression sometimes of musicians, particularly classical musicians, kind of being kind of up their own butts a little bit and kind of snooty about where they're at. And I found that the higher end musician that I play with, the nicer they are. It just is like there's something about. I often confuse people because I like to combine the ideas of music and like fighting and mixed martial arts. And if you watch high level combat, physical combat competition, the level of respect that the competitors have for each other is super high because it's so difficult to do what they do. And in the same sort of sense, I find for musicians, that the higher end the musician, the more chill they usually are, because you do realize what sort of work this other person has put in to be at that level where you can just sort of like make it happen and think about it in that kind of way. And when it does happen in a room, like it happened during your recording, and I really think that there are a couple of performances on this recording that are like just as good as they could possibly be for any musician. You're really looking
I agree.
at something happening in the middle of the room, between your ideas, the efforts of the people, and it's just sort of the common work towards the goal that doesn't reveal itself, especially with a recording for a long ass time.
Hmm.
It's pretty
Hmm.
special, and
It is.
it speaks to where we started, which is the idea of relationships. Um, so let's talk about the four pieces that are on the record for you. There's
Okay.
the title track. We were going to title it. We were going to maybe use a different title, but the title track is Addressing Wonder, and we ended up using that because it's just deliciously obtuse in a way. But talk about that piece, Addressing Wonder, and
Okay.
what it is and
Okay.
what you wrote it for and
I,
that sort of.
First of all, I have to say I love that you described the title as deliciously obtuse. The piece is it's dedicated to my brother Bob, who is deliciously
Yeah,
obtuse.
there we go. I give it to
No,
you. You can have it.
right. It's perfect. Uh, so my brother is a thinker. He gets lost in his own thought a lot. He's a genius. Um, and we've had many late night discussions about all kinds of esoterica. Um, and it always feels when I'm talking to him like we are just wondering together. Um, he way
Is
out
he
in
older or
front.
younger than you?
He's older. I'm the youngest of five. Yeah, he's 4 years older than me. But it always feels like a mind expanding experience to sit and chat with him at leisure. And so this piece, which was originally um, commissioned by, I think it was like the League of Composers
Hmm.
in New York, for a trio that I did not know. So
Right.
this is a lone example of a piece where I actually did not know the players. But it was a trio that was trying to get off the ground, slightly unusual instrumentation, viola, cello,
Hmm.
piano,
Hmm.
as opposed to violin, cello,
Yeah, yeah.
piano. Um,
Which,
and
if people don't really know, that cello, violin, piano trio is one of the oldest and most venerable like groups of chamber music. You just call it a piano trio, and that's what it
right,
means. But with
yeah,
the viola, rather than the violin, viola being a slightly larger and deeper voiced instrument, definitely added for me by itself an interest, because you're used to hearing this kind of shiny sound up top.
yeah,
When you get this more woody kind of like contralto kind of sound, it's very different.
yeah, it is. And Hannah really nailed it.
Yeah,
I
she
mean, she's a really
crushes.
great player.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's her and Chris Gross, who we talked about before, and Steve
yeah,
Beck, the
and Steve
pianist,
Beck,
who is just phenomenal
phenomenal.
and just like in the best way, like a freak of nature.
Yeah,
He
yep,
just
yeah,
knows. That's probably the best way to put it. Like he just knows, and it's
yeah.
and
And it
also
doesn't matter the
a
style of music he's
right.
being asked to play; he just knows.
And again, nice guy. Hate to be an eat it fix about it, but
Super
it's
nice
like
guy.
it's gotta the hang. It's all about the hang, really.
Yeah, yeah, and he's an amazing musician, just down in his bones. And so that piece, anyways, was an attempt to just sort of explore gesture and uh, gesture being the parallel to me for, let's say the an idea that my brother would drop into a conversation and then we would explore it for hours. Um, and in the beginning of Addressing Wonder, there's a couple of gestures that to me seem to just sort of continue to ripple out throughout the piece. And play out in different ways, whether it's colors or instrumental colors or articulations, or different shaped lines, etc. But that seemed to be the power. That's what that piece is to me, and that's where it comes from. I have to say that it is of course an older piece for me. I was about 35 when I wrote it.
It's the
You know,
oldest piece on the record, right? It's the
on the record as well, yeah. And I listen to it, and there is a kind of a darkness to it, but I I just still really love that piece.
yeah, it's a good
And
piece.
the way, and thank you, and the way they play it, of course, just makes it 1,000 times better than anything I've heard.
Well, I mean, look, I got to tell you, you can't polish a turd. Like it really is just like no, honestly, like you can only make like shitty music so noble, you know. So you have to have enough
Uh,
clay to sort of pull shit off of it. Um,
they do.
the
They certainly
now,
did.
yeah, no doubt. I that was like that was one of the like I'll definitely remember that session as like one of the times where something happened.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. For sure.
speaking of Adam Abe's house, just to go back for a second, he brought me in on a session one time with Garrick Olson, pianist, and he was recording a bunch of Liszt transcriptions of Bach like organ preludes. And some of them are just insane. Like, you know, it's just Liszt all over the place. And and Garrick Olson, he was just massive, and he's playing on this enormous Bosendorfer, and but somehow was not just not in the right space, and in a similar way to watching that happen, I watched Abe's house like just put him into this almost trance like space where it was just like he let him do a couple of sections, and then Adam just goes, Garrett, let's just go back to the top, and like you just play, and I'll stop you when I need to. And it was the same thing that happened in your session. It was like you just had the feeling of, oh shit, this is it right now. This is happening. And he never stopped him. He played all the way to the end. But you know, when those moments, it's like being a musician, like being a classical musician, especially, is like being a little bit of a heroin addict, because those hits of the pure shit are so good that you spend like literally thousands of hours chasing it, hoping that something will be as successful as that 5 minutes that you spent in that space.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so definitely, I will take a memory of that session, and it blazed by. Like you know,
Yeah.
we recorded that in less than a morning, I think, and
Yeah.
that's for what we
Yeah.
do is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, well, let's go with a couple. Let's go with some common tones. Also in the recording is a we call it a combination of two. Not it's a song, but it's a combination of two texts, right?
A line between, yeah,
Yeah,
a couple of E. E. Cummings texts. Um,
and that's for
so the
soprano and electronic sounds.
Yeah, for soprano and fixed media, right? So the short story, or I'll try to make it short, is Louise Toppin, a colleague here at ECU at the time, requested a piece that was
Now at
somehow,
University of Michigan, I believe. Correct? Is that right?
yes,
And
via
just
Chapel Hill. Yeah.
take a moment to say fuck Michigan.
Okay.
Um, I mean,
Go
Louise is
state.
great.
Right.
Not you, Louise. You're
Yeah.
wonderful. Not that's not at all you. But seriously, from the depths of my heart, fuck the University of Michigan.
Uh, but she's really great. She's a fabulous soprano, fabulous musician, fabulous colleague, and an amazing teacher who does so much for her colleagues. Um, and she has her own sort of producing arm, Videmus, which promotes many composers. It's really great. Anyway, she asked for a piece that was somehow Holocaust related, and I it's a hard ask.
Mm.
And honestly, I spent almost a year reading all kinds of texts from the Holocaust, about the Holocaust, from Therese and children's poetry and so on. Um,
Yeah, that's super
and I,
positive. That's really
oh, God,
uplifting shit.
Sure, it was a dark year, I'll tell
Yeah,
you.
that's pretty tough.
Uh, it was horrible, and the bottom line is, I couldn't. When she said the Holocaust, I understood what she was talking about. She was talking about World War II and the Nazis. Um, but the bottom line is, the more I read, the more I just couldn't come to terms with the fact that there had been so
Mm.
very many Holocausts over time,
And
and
at least a couple happening right now.
right, that there's always a couple happening. No matter you pick your year in history, there's always a couple happening. And so I started to broaden my thinking, and found these two poems by E. E. Cummings. E. E. Cummings is a poet I go back to a lot. In fact, I'm studying some E. E. Cummings right now for a different project. And these talk about, when God created and when man destroyed. And there's also some in the other poem, the second poem, talks about the beauty of emerging love and so on. And to me, bringing these together, felt it just felt like it encompassed, as E. Cummings often does, so much of the human problem, the human
Mm.
issue. Um, and I combined them, overlaid them. More often they alternate. Um, and at the in the very end section, which it has a special place for me. Sort of took the opening um, when God created. Uh, I turned it into a prayer, and it's actually the tune is Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. It's distended and so on,
No,
but
wait.
it's
Are you Jewish?
uh, no, but it came to me in a
Oh yeah,
dream,
right.
and yeah,
I'm a natural.
um, yeah. So so that project developed over quite some time, as I say, a year of reading that
Mm.
led me to just go away from the Holocaust to humanity's ability to just be evil. And of course, the title line between is from a Solzhenitsyn line, the line between good and evil goes through men's hearts.
Yeah,
Uh,
some really light reading that you did over the course of that year
yeah,
for sure. I wanted to sort of take that mood and go back for a second to something I meant to mention with your other piece, which you said was the oldest and also had a certain darkness to it.
I think so.
Um, I mean, let's think about where your life was at the time that you wrote the piece. You're living in the middle of Indiana, Wabash. You'd just gotten divorced, correct? You'd left your son behind in New York City. That's pretty dark. I don't really know like how you could write a piece during that kind of era of your life and have it like be super jangly and
Yeah,
happy. But
you're probably right about that.
I mean, I know
Yeah,
you weren't
and
trying to write something dark, but I think that
yeah,
there's just I don't know how that could not have permeated
yeah.
what you were
Well, I
doing at that
suspect,
time.
also every 2 weeks I would drive back to New York to spend a weekend with my son, and it's a lot of time in the car thinking
Yeah,
about a lot of things,
yeah.
and the ideas
Oh
gestating.
God,
I
oh
think you're right.
God, oh man, what
Yeah.
is that? Like a 12 hour? What is that? 10 hours?
Uh, yeah, yeah. It was like 12. Yeah, yeah,
Ufamadon. Oh, oh, that
yeah.
is just like that's so rough.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
we
But
should mention that your son is a grown ass man now with his own son, and that all turned out fine. But
it all turned out great. In fact, we had a WhatsApp call this morning, and there Jackson was eating
was
blueberries
he
with a
like
spoon, negotiating a
a
spoon, and
year? Is he a year old or something?
he's a little more. He's 19 months, almost 19
Wow.
months. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
oh my.
yeah, yeah.
Shit
He's
is
doing
about to
great.
get very real.
Yeah,
um, yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like when you and I met each other. Like you and I were in very different places in our lives than we are now. I was gonna like make this a bigger section, but we can permeate it into or sort of wind it into what we're doing here. I tell the story that like I arrived in 2001 at ECU, and I'd gone to school there 4 years earlier, but 5 years earlier. I didn't know anybody. I mean, besides the professors that had taught there, that I wasn't like probably going to hang out with. But you took me out to dinner. It was my first night on campus, and you and I spent. We were both single, um, and as we mentioned before, Eastern North Carolina can be rough. I always used to say that, like, if you're single in North Carolina and you knew how to read and didn't watch NASCAR, it was going to go pretty bad for you. And it does. I'm like really close to the truth on that.
Yes, you are.
And so
I'm
you and I
sorry to agree with you, but you are.
spent a lot of time together during that time. And some of the music, the cello piece that we're going to talk about in a second, dates from that era. But I don't know if it was quite as dark. It was just kind of like
No.
this kind of middle period, right? Like where,
Yeah, things were not as bad. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you lived on your own in this house sort of out in the country, and I would come out and we would get high and listen to music or play poker with people. And those were really great memories for me. That's like
Yeah, me too.
basically my defining, besides driving to play gigs outside of town, my defining memories of being at ECU. Um, you and I were in each other's weddings, or I came to your wedding. You signed
Also
my
at your wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, you
I
signed
signed
my
the ketubah.
my
Right.
wedding my wedding contract. Actually, hold on. I have a picture of that I scanned. Let me share my screen here. It looks terrible because it's a scan from.
Oh, I thought you were going to say my signature looked terrible. Okay.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, that goes without saying. So there you are. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, sure.
Signing my ketubah. You thought that
Hmm.
you'd have to practice your Hebrew name, but they let you sign it in English, so it was all good. But otherwise, I looked
I
all
see
through
X
my
and three, and who's
yeah.
next to three there? I don't recognize
That's
that person.
Rachel's brother, and there's my
Oh,
dad.
okay. Yeah, I recognize your dad. Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
his wife here.
Okay.
Um, but I looked through the rest of it. I have this whole big book. Let me come back to not sharing my screen. I have this whole big book, which is like my wedding book, and it's got like literally thousands of photographs in it, and I can't find a single one of you other than other than that one. So I'm not really sure that you attended my wedding, but you were there before it happened.
Oh yeah,
So
we were there. We still talk about that dinner. You
oh
kidding?
my God, yeah, that was so many years.
Yeah.
But so like just point of fact is that you and I have been. Um, Let me put myself back to full screen. You and I have been friends now for 20
Over
20
20 years.
years.
20 years. Yeah.
And a lot of that was spent like together and doing, staying in the same hotel room on the road to play your piece in Richmond or
That's
that.
right.
And it's just like there's so many similarities to like the early careers of classical musicians as there are to like early rock musicians of just making it work, going places together and making shit work. And so let's talk about the other piece that dates from that time period, which is the Al Momento for cello and then pre-recorded sounds. Or you say fixed media, but I always just say
Yeah.
pre-recorded sounds.
Yeah. Yeah, pre-recorded sound, fixed media, whatever. Um, yeah. So the year before I wrote that, I wrote the piece that you recorded, A Function of Memory, for clarinet and fixed media, pre-recorded sounds. And although I
For my
had been
predecessor, Nathan Williams, also my teacher,
that's
and
right,
the
right,
guy,
and also
honestly,
fabulous,
who saved my
fabulous
life,
musician.
but for some
Mhm.
reason doesn't want to talk to me anymore. But that's okay, Nathan. If you ever see this, you can give me
Right.
a call.
Um, and Nathan had asked for that piece, and I had never written a piece with electronics. I've been teaching electronic music for a number of years already, but never really felt the creative impulse to work with the technology. And but he asked for a piece, and this was going to be for the first new music at ECU Festival, now known as the North Carolina New Music Initiative. And when a very, very fine musician asks you to write him a piece, you say yes.
Yeah,
Um,
Nathan
and
crushes.
yeah, he's incredible. So I did, and in fact, writing that first electronic piece for me, some newer technology had come out, and it was like playing a video game. It was I didn't have to write code. I was playing with sound in a way that was very comfortable and a lot of fun. And I made a ton of mistakes, but I really really had a great time doing it. And then when Kelly Nicholson, the cellist at ECU, heard that piece, she said, "I want one." And she's a very fine player, but a
Mhm.
very, very different kind of player than Nathan. Um, and so Kelly and I spent a good amount of time getting to know each other and talking musical ideas. We never talked about very specific ideas. We just talked about what we liked in music. Um, and as I did with you, as I did with Nathan, as I did with Kelly, sort of bringing ideas to her and saying, "How does this feel?" And like you, she always said, "Feels great. Just keep going. Do whatever you want." And really, by the time we got to the end of that piece, the only things that she needed in terms of adjustments were when she sat down to play it with speakers behind her, she couldn't hear certain cues. So I had to sort of add certain cues just because the frequency of the cello was getting in the way of her hearing a particular cue. So I had to reinforce that. But she was great in terms of she was a great collaborator. And that piece, again, it's a piece where the end, like the line between, um, this is really funny because I am just at a moment where I'm bemoaning the fact that I don't think I write good endings. And but I really love the ending of the line between, and I really love the ending of Al Momento, which is just sort of this band of color with the cello playing a thin line that's almost indistinguishable from the band of color. And it's a section that goes on for a couple of minutes. And I think it's really effective and evocative after all the activity earlier on in the piece. It's sort of a very long, slow cadence, I guess, just a long, slow tune. Um, but yeah, that piece dates from, I guess, 2002.
Mhm.
And it was a ton of fun to write and a very rewarding experience, and it's been played by
Did
a
you
number of
feel
cellists.
like you had a more facility with the electronics after having worked on the piece for Nathan?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I even used the same software at that time for Kelly's piece as I did
I think
for
so.
Nathan's piece. Yeah, so I knew it, and I didn't have to learn the software as much. Um,
What do you
Still,
what do you use
I
to teach now?
well now basically digitally speaking, two different programs. One is Pro Tools, and then more of a computer music program, Max.
Oh
Um,
well, yeah.
uh, and of course, I provide a background with there's still cutting and splicing tape, although not this year because we're not in the studio. But I think it's important for the students to have a week or two to sit there with a razor blade and realize what makes a
Yeah,
good splice, or how there's a bad splice with magnetic tape, just like a bad splice in Pro Tools. I mean, it's going to
right,
cause the same pop, and
right.
you got
And
to
then
understand
go
why.
listen to the Beatles and like
Right, right,
actually see what the fuck they were doing with that kind of
yeah,
technology is just
yeah,
so
absolutely,
crazy.
yeah, yeah. And the Beatles and anybody else who was working with tape at that, Stockhausen, Berio, Davidovsky, they're
It's boring,
all,
boring, boring.
sitting there with these little tiny, making a mosaic out of these
Yeah,
little
no, it
tiny
really
pieces.
it blows my mind that you could. What was it like? 15-inch tape, right? It was like
Uh,
15 inches per
a
second,
second. Yeah, either that or 7.5,
and
but
like they
usually
were like the
15
like
because yeah,
2-inch tape, right? It's like thick tape.
yeah, usually quarter inch.
Oh,
Quarter
really?
inch is 2 track. Half inch is 4 track and inch is 8 track.
Oy vey.
But most of the machines that they had early on were
Just
quarter-inch
stereo. Yeah.
tape. Uh,
Wow.
the
I
stereo
thought
two
it was
track.
thicker
Yep,
tape,
yep, and
but
then
still,
yeah,
to spend all of that time to create the
yeah.
sounds, to record the sounds, to splice the sounds,
Yeah.
it's
To shape
fucking
each
crazy.
to shape each sound. You're not just splicing a sound that's ongoing. You got to give it a beginning and end. You got to give it some character,
Yeah.
and then you got to give it the whole phrase. So it's like, you know, writing a solo for an instrument, but each note, you have to
Yeah. Some
craft
kid
each pitch.
sitting and fucking around on GarageBand has no idea the kind of sweat equity that used to go into
Right.
making that shit because you
That's
didn't
right.
have digital tools at fucking all,
Yeah, that's
which
right.
is just
And I
like,
mean, it's okay. It's okay that it's developed. I mean, I got
oh
no problem
God,
with that.
yeah, fuck
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's
And then
like
we move on to, yeah.
I asked
No, I was
ASOS to record me to tape, and he told me to go fuck myself because he's just like, why would I do that? It's like
right.
we have
Yeah,
this technology that we. What are you talking about here?
yeah,
But
yep,
still,
yeah.
like I think that's a real dividing line that is happening, not just overall in culture, but particularly in music, is people who grow up pre-digitally, like you and I, and like the vast majority of people now who are growing up grew up, they grew up digitally. Anybody who grew up after, say, 1993 or something like that, grew up with the internet, whereas you and I did not. And I think just functionally, just being sort of around digital music and the preponderance and ease of getting to digital, like, it's amazing to me to think about in college if they assign Brahms Brahms 3 for me to listen to for music history. I got to go to the music library. I got to find that record, hope that somebody else hasn't checked it out, come put it on a fucking LP deck, and sit there with the headphones from the library, these crappy like foam headphones that 50,000 other people had used. And that was your listening experience. Like that's how you discovered new songs and new pieces. And the idea of just going to YouTube and having 50 different versions of things for you just to figure out, it's it's incredibly different. And I think that both sides, us old people have no idea what it's like to not have that, and the young people have no idea what it's like to have it, to have had the experience with tape and analog experience. So, you
Mhm.
know, I was gonna subtitle our talk today, "No Country for Old Men," because it's just like for me, I keep feeling, I've had this conversation with you for years now of feeling like I'm aging out of what I'm trying to do. And I do think that that's a big difference is people who it's a different world that people are growing up in a vastly different way, maybe than any other generation in history than we grew
I,
up.
I, the, the digital landscape makes for a very different everything. But I also think, I think back to our predecessors, or maybe our grand predecessors who didn't have recording,
Right.
right? And so their ability to absorb things was based on incredibly intense listening to the single performance they could get to of
Hmm.
something,
Hmm.
or
That was
to,
always live by definition.
right,
Have to
or
be.
the only secondary thing was trying to find a score and sitting in a piano and
Hmm.
playing it, which of course, was not necessarily the same color and so on. But our predecessors really dealt with far less than we had. It all had to be up in the imagination. And now, YouTube is also very interesting in another way to me, because not only do you have a million performances, but every performance basically is equally available. And so the
Right.
students in some of my classes will often find a recording that sounds horrible. I mean, I cannot believe that they're doing this. So I have started embedding very particular links in there so they'll listen
Right.
to them,
I see.
or using Naxos,
Yes.
which we have the Naxos library, which did a ton of great recordings there. But it's really interesting. But it also restores. It's not live, but it restores the visual element of performance,
Right.
which has value.
Right.
It's not just purely oral, but it exists as a performative thing, which I think has a lot of value. But yeah, the digital world is it's a very very interesting one. Um, but I really, I like any other era. I suspect um, there's good and there's bad. There's people who see opportunities to create really imaginative things, and people who see opportunities to just be incredibly derivative. I mean, it's easier than ever to do that as well. There's so many examples.
It's also easier than ever to sort of get by on the idea of who you are rather than like, if you come at things right now with like a fresh perspective and you're a very different person, it almost doesn't matter whether your music sucks or not on some level. And that's like for a dinosaur like myself, that's where I start to feel like it's not for me. And I just I hope that I'm mature enough to just be saying I don't get this. Like I also don't think a lot of this music is being created for me. I'm not the
Mhm,
intended audience for a lot of this
mhm,
stuff.
mhm,
And so what do I have to say about it anyway that's material?
mhm,
Like you go, I don't want to begrudgingly age out. I just want to like be like, okay, fine. Like this is no longer my milieu. Please go do your shit. But like for
right.
when you're a player, it gets discouraging to be like, particularly for me, as you know, like I'm a good fucking clarinet player, and I have like this really nice like Ferrari that I want to put out on the road, and I'm often asked in more new stuff to not make characteristic noises and to make sounds that are that I don't get a single moment to play my instrument, like not a single moment to do what I want to do. So I feel like there's a large cadre of younger players who are perfectly happy and want to do those things. So please let me just hand off the baton, and I'm going to go off and play only the things that I want to play for the rest of my life.
Right. Well, there is a ton of music out there, and the amount of music is probably doubling every week.
Mm.
And I, I know that what I do is is now. Um, there was a time when people would just listen to it and say, I don't get it, I don't understand what you're doing, and now it's old school.
Hmm.
And I mean, it is that's what it is. It's an older style, I guess. Certainly addressing wonder. I don't feel that way about the music because it feels like who I am, but I recognize that compared to the way people are thinking about the sound and sound sources and what instruments are for, and the way to make a dramatic expression in sound, um, my perspective seems limited to many people,
Hmm.
um, because that's the name. What did Mahler say? The younger generation is always right, and I can accept that. I,
Yeah,
I, I
yeah.
can accept that. The younger generation right now will, in time, be my age.
Us, yes,
Yeah, and that's
like
fine. I mean, that's the
with
cycle of things. We're all just
mathematical
meant in space.
certainty.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
kids like then will probably be like going full neo romantic and like full like neo tonal, and
yeah,
all the process and noise people are going to be like, what the fuck? Like we work so hard, and you're gonna. But
yeah.
I'm like, for me, it's like I spent a lot of my playing life, as you know, doing the new stuff with you and or trying to create a lot of new things, and at a certain point for me, it's just like I don't want to learn more notes. I'm, I'm done. I'm done learning all of that stuff, and I just kind of want to. I want to spend the last musicians are lucky that we have a pretty long shelf life. Like we don't lose. We're not like a professional basketball player
Professional
who's going to be
athletes. Yeah.
done at
Hmm.
32. I'm getting better at 50 than I was. I'm like my 50-year-old clarinet playing would just brutalize my 25-year-old clarinet playing. It's like not even like, and your perspective as a composer is just like worlds different than it was when you were 20, 25 years old. Like you might as well be a different person, like
Uh-huh.
for real. And
Hmm.
that's something that young composers and players may not really recognize is that one day you will be us, and
Hmm.
and, and it will happen, and you got to figure out at that point what you want to do with the shelf life that you have left. And for me, I just want to make beautiful things. I'm just tired of making ugly things for
Hmm.
me, and that could be
Hmm.
brand new. It
Hmm.
could be brand new, but it just needs to move me in a way. We spend a lot of time, I think I spent a lot of time playing things that I thought people should hear and that they needed to hear. And now I feel like playing things that people want to hear. I don't necessarily
Hmm.
think they have to be mutually exclusive.
Hmm.
Like, I definitely think that oral history, your piece for me, fits on a recital where I'm going to play Brahms
Hmm.
or something like that. But, and it doesn't have to be that. It could be noise stuff too, but it has to move me emotionally in the same way that Bach and Brahms move me, and that is a very particular craft-based kind of thing that I personally am turned on by.
Hmm. Hmm.
I love craft in almost anything. If you make coffee like really beautifully, I want to watch you make coffee in your beautiful
Hmm.
fashion.
Hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about Palladium, because
Okay.
that once again brings us back to another spoke in our wheel, which is Sharon
Uh-huh.
Harms,
Uh-huh.
soprano, and just like also super
Astounding.
quality fucking person. Not just
Yeah.
astounding musically, but just a great person.
Yeah. 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 So I actually Sharon's a really interesting one. I was guest composer up at the composers conference. I don't know how many years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, whatever it was, and
Wellesley,
it was at Wellesley. Now it's at Brandeis. Yeah,
right?
and so I walked in as guest composer. You know, you're something of a mentor, as it were, to these fabulously gifted fellows who are there, and of course their works are being performed by this world class band. Jimmy Baker's the conductor. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
so I
yeah.
went to a rehearsal the first day I was there, I guess, for the upcoming concert. And uh, the band was there. This was their first rehearsal of the piece, of this particular piece. And the singer came in, and I had a copy of the score that I was looking at. And she absolutely nailed the piece. I mean, she just nailed it. And then one of the young fellows saw me just sort of shaking my head as she was doing wondrous things. And he said, she just got the music 2 hours ago.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was like,
yeah.
how is this even possible? And anyways, I got to know her. And, probably not the first question I asked her, but the second question would have been, um, can you come down to ECU to give a
Right,
concert?
right.
you know, and, being the generous musician she was, she said, yeah, sure, as long as you write a piece for me. And so, I did. And, for her, and she wanted to bring Steve. So we'll go for her and Steve. And the poetry, Palladium, I discovered, it was a period, it's very difficult political times that we were living in. I began reading or subscribing to a poem a day, and getting a new poem into my email box every morning. It was a great way to
I
stay
would
with art,
so ignore those
rather than reading the
emails.
news. Yeah, well, I subscribed to it, so
I know. I would
Um,
still ignore them. I just can't.
and I love this poem, Palladium by Jim Brasfield, and I lived with it for a little bit. Then I wrote him a note, and I said, "This is why I really like this poem, and I'd like to send it." He was like, "You go, just you know, you're welcome to it." Did, and then I got after it was all done, I sent him a recording, and it's one of the most gratifying letters I've ever got. His he loved it. Let's just say, but it was also, well, he's a writer. It was beautifully written. So I felt as though I did the poem justice because the poet felt as though I had expanded upon his idea in some interesting ways.
That's
But
interesting
working with
because they
Steve,
don't
yeah,
always love how musicians go about it. And you know, you're not going to write. You're not someone who's writing stuff that resolves on like tonic and dominant. Like you're writing
right,
very complicated
right.
intellectual shit. So like for a poet to be able to dig that straight off bat is pretty nice.
It was great. It was really great. And I have since actually set some more. One more to do, and then Palladium will be sort of within a set. Um,
Is this all for Sharon or?
yeah, yeah. I mean, she knows I'm doing it, but I haven't shared the other poems I've done. One of them is particularly interesting. It's actually quite brief, but as I began writing, it's called Ceylon. Um, as I began writing this, I started to hear multiple ways of doing it. So, in the context of this song cycle, if you will, I'm actually setting Ceylon 3 different times. Uh,
Ceylon? Like isn't it like
like
Indonesia
the
now or something?
artist. No,
Uh
no, the artist. Celan.
oh,
Yeah. Um,
I don't know it. I
and
don't know that artist at all.
the poet. I'm sorry, the poet.
Don't know the
Um,
poet either.
so I have to on my phone here. Well,
No, no, oh no, don't do that now. Come on, come back,
okay.
come back, come
Yeah,
back,
I
come
don't
back.
know what I just did. I think I just got rid of you or something.
Yeah, you're no longer.
Um,
But it's a delightful
okay.
publicity.
Okay.
Oh, there
Here
you
we go.
are. You have more
Yeah.
hair in your publicity photo, just a tiny bit.
Right. Okay. But
Just
anyways,
right here.
yeah, I can't remember. So that was 3 years ago.
Those were the
Uh,
days.
yeah. But anyways, I love Jim Brasfield's stuff and have been working with it a bit. And working with Sharon and Steve is just, I would send Steve things and just say, am I over the top here? Is this too much?
Yeah,
And and then he would send me a recording of him sight reading it. And I'm like,
yeah, right. You're just like,
okay, I
give
guess
me a.
not.
You know, I sidebar Steve Beck's story for a second. So I did this concert with Chris Gross, the cellist, and with Sharon and Steve with George Crumb and a few of George Crumb's pieces. And there were a couple of there was a piece for piano four hands, one of the Macrocosmos or no, uh, what was it called? Celestial, whatever. It's a set of pieces that he wrote for piano four hands and six hands because then the page turner actually comes in on part of it. Celestial Mechanics is the name of the set of pieces.
Okay.
And the other two pianists came in and really had to take a bunch of like pieces of tape and be like, this is where we're pressing, this is where we're pressing. There, you have to kind of mark up the piano because George Crumb asks you to reach inside a lot and touch specific strings or stroke specific strings. You have to know where they are, and if you don't know how to play the piano, each piano is slightly different on the interior. So they showed up early and they put all the different tape markings, and then after that, Steve Beck comes in and doesn't need any of that shit. Like
Yeah.
he just is like, oh yeah, boom, boom, boom. Even with their tape still on there,
Right.
with an unfamiliar piano, he's just like, bap, 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 bap. Okay, we're good. And I'm just like, what? Who? What?
Yeah.
That can't be.
Yeah.
But that's just sort of like he's got that kind of mind. And so does Sharon, actually. Sharon has that kind of mind where she just sees it. She's like a consummate musician. And that's really weird to say about a singer, to be honest, because like usually, I mean, the most singers with the most beautiful voices can still be kind of doofuses when it comes to like reading music and like really sort of
Yeah.
being involved in the intricate rhythmic stuff with that you tend to write, which has like subdivisions of fives and sevens and like not stuff that you're going to just kind of like learn by ear and then sing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to be able
Mm-hmm.
to do that the way that she does it with the kind of like bright attitude that she brings in, Sharon's the real deal. I like her a lot. I'm glad.
It's
Like I
it's just
didn't.
pure musical thinking. you know.
Yeah, you introduced her, I think, to me. I think like I didn't know her before you had her,
Mhm.
but now she's
Yeah,
like
she's a really gifted musician. They all are, they all are. Um, but I will never forget going to that rehearsal and seeing her basically sight read this. It was like a vocal concerto. I mean, it was
oh
very
she
difficult to do.
she did the same thing for I can't mention who wrote this piece or who it was for because it'll be obvious. And but the singer couldn't got sick and couldn't come to one of the rehearsals, and we just kind of hired Sharon on the spot to come in and just do it because it was complicated and there were like six other musicians. And in the middle of that rehearsal, I was just like,
She nailed it. Yeah,
can we can we just get her to come because this
yeah,
is really crushing right now.
yeah,
That was my first experience with her,
yeah,
and that was like right after my wife's mom had died. She was just the nicest,
yeah.
easiest person to like get in and get to work with. So again, it's like one of those things with composers that the same thing with people. You can tell what the quality of a person by the quality of the company that they keep. The quality of a person's friends often will tell you a lot about the quality of that person and the quality of the people who decide to enter your funhouse, Eddie Jacobs. Because I often say that a lot of composers have, or some composers have like, you got to be this tall to ride this ride, and that's you. You have to be able to play your instrument on a pretty high level to approach your music, and that's just a fact. You dislike being told that your music is difficult, but there are parts of your music that are difficult.
Of
And
course.
so, when you have people who are willing to put in the kind of time and then show up with the kind of ethos and ethics to just blow it out on the day when they need to for you, it's pretty indicative of who you are and the
Thank you.
quality of your person and what you produce.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is one of the best parts of life to work with amazing people. I mean, it just is. It's you remember those best performances that you've given, and I remember those times sitting and hearing someone I have incredible respect for turning a phrase of my music. It's a gift. I mean, it's an incredible gift, and this whole collection of music that we've recorded that you produced that Adam has engineered so beautifully. It's uh, it's all that. It's all just a series of great moments for me.
With some
Thank you
beautiful
for making
artwork
that
that's coming
happen.
up from our usual art director
From
Chris
Chris Glass.
Glass is going to be a
Yeah,
really
yeah,
if we could get this album to do what we want it to do, it's going to look pretty sweet. So I'm not going to give away the secret, but
yeah.
like it
Good,
should be the concept of the visual part of the album is pretty sick, and I'll just let that sit. Yeah, it's like
good.
it's my friend Jeremy Gill, who is another composer. It says the same thing, and it's in the sense that when you're a composer, you hear a ton of really, really, really bad performances of your music. It just is like the preponderance of bad to good performances that you've heard in your lifetime is weighted very heavily on the shit side. Um, but to not only hear a good performance, but be sitting in the audience and be more involved in what the performer is doing than what you wrote, those are those moments that are few and far between when you're not concerned about how the piece is coming over and you're just merely like involved in the execution of what's actually happening at that moment and hoping for good things from the person who has given their effort to you. Those are the moments I think for a composer that make it really super
Yeah,
worth
I
it.
mean those are the moments when the music has taken wings. It's become someone else's, and it is interpretable and interpreted. It's like I remember the first time I had a conversation with my son, and it became clear that there's a lot of me in him. He is his own person. He
Hmm.
is he is taking flight before my very eyes.
Hmm.
That's the sensation. It's like, oh, Sharon has made this phrase hers. I didn't think to ask her to do that. She just brought her musicality to it, and there it is,
Hmm.
And it just doesn't get any better. It just doesn't. Yeah, yeah.
Let me ask
And you
you.
mentioned Jeremy. You mentioned Jeremy, by the way, and I just want to say, I there are moments in those recording sessions where what sticks out in my mind is Jeremy's ears, Jeremy's grace in offering comments
Yeah,
and suggestions, and I'm really glad to have met him through you. He's a very special
yeah,
person. I
agreed.
really quite like him.
Yeah, we did this recording over 2 days in a studio with Adam Abe's house, and we brought I brought Jeremy along as a fourth pair of ears, really, in the booth because you had me, you,
Adam.
Jeremy, and Adam all sitting in the booth, and then the musicians in the studio doing their thing. Just having that level of thought is just like, especially, people may not realize, but like we recorded 4 pieces over 2 days, and that's fast. That's real fast. Like you would, I mean, we ended up getting everything that we wanted, but you'd love to have double that amount of time for
Hmm.
sure. But recording time and space is expensive, and and that's when, like, having players like those players coming in, and musicians and singers, and just being able to nail it, like, it just makes everything, all of the stress of, are we going to do this in time, is this going to work, when you put all of those brains together, and you do it in a way that it's a good hang and there's a no assholes policy, then you can pretty much get a lot of shit done.
Yeah, and
It's
we
like,
did.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, because I do think, like, in the course of making the stuff that I've made with OPG Records, I've managed to make gifts, I think, presents for the most important musical people in my life, and this is yours.
Thank you.
Um, and no matter what we do in this life or the afterworld, this music will be here now. It's on the interwebs, and will exist
Until the cloud blows away.
until technology fails, for real. And that's one of the reason that I made this, the idea of OPG Records in the first place, is to leave something beautiful behind when I go. And this is a project that I'm super proud of, that I love you. You know that, like, you were a real rock for me when I was a young professor, and really needed somebody to just be on my side for a while. Um, Let me close with asking you a question I like to ask a bunch of people. I'm going to ask it in 2 different ways: classical and non-classical. Okay, who is on your Mount Rushmore? You only get four. Who would be on your Mount Rushmore of classical composers? I don't want to say the greatest. I want to say the ones that you like the best.
And Mount Rushmore, you said.
Just four of them, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Boy, is that hard. Um, well, I guess I'm gonna have to say Palestrina, Bach, Brahms,
Oh, yeah, thank you.
and
Yes.
yeah, and there's really so many, but you know what? I'm gonna go with Webern actually.
Ooh.
Um,
All right.
but there really are so many others. I'm tempted to say Mindy Wagner, David Rakowski,
Mhm.
uh,
I
some
got
some really
in an,
fabulous.
in an argument with Joan Tower about Brahms, because I insisted that Brahms is better than Beethoven, and she's like, "You're just fucking crazy." She's like, "There's no way. You're out of control here." And I'm like, "I'm a clarinet player, buddy. What do you want from me?" She's like, "All right, I'll allow it." No, but I love Brahms. Bach. I have Bach, Brahms, Um, I have Prokofiev only
Okay.
mainly because hearing the Virginia Symphony play music from Romeo and Juliet when I was in 10th grade
Hmm.
in a live performance was the moment where I was like, I got to do that shit. That fucking
Yeah.
crushes.
Uh-huh.
And
Well,
I
for me,
Bach,
that piece was the Quartet for the End of Time.
yeah. I'll probably have to
Yeah.
put Mozart just because I'm a clarinet player, but
Yeah.
it's like it's a little messy. But now let me give you a harder one. Give me your four biggest influences in music of any genre, including classical, but just give me like if you had to make a real Mount Rushmore of just any musicians.
Well, so I grew up playing jazz, so Coltrane, um, and actually, it's very much brought to mind recently. In the mid '70s, when I was in high school, uh, we were transcribing and playing tunes all the time by Chick Corea,
Mm,
and of course, he just passed away.
yeah,
So, I mean, Chick Corea was just astounding, and I said Coltrane, um, and no, I really do love the inventiveness of the Beatles. And can you tell we're near
yeah. I just saw the helicopter go
actually,
by.
military helicopters? Um, and then actually, you know what? I could go a lot of ways, but I'm going to go with Stevie Wonder. Uh,
Nice.
I just could not get enough of Stevie Wonder growing up.
It's very funny. You're the second, including myself. So you and me are the only people to go from the classical to the regular one and include no classical people on like your actual four people. There was
Oh yeah,
nothing classical about the four people in your Mount Rushmore in real life.
yeah, but they're all solid musical
Oh
thinkers,
yeah,
structurally. I mean, it's all the same to me. Every one of those that I named, you want to talk Stevie Wonder, we could name, I don't know, Schubert. I mean,
right.
it's like amazing songwriting.
They
Uh,
are the same. Like that's what
yeah,
like that. But that's bothers me about what a lot of classical musicians do not realize is that it is the same shit.
yeah,
People trying to make a song that connects to your heart, and that's the root. That's it. That's basically all there is
that's it.
to it.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, there's more similarities between what we do than what we don't.
for
That's the
sure.
wisdom for the day.
Yeah, sure.
All right,
Sure.
Eddie. I thought we would go a half hour, but we have now gone an hour and a half, so that's pretty normal for us, I
Okay.
think.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I can't
Listen,
wait for this to come out. Ides of March, March 15th. Addressing
thank you.
Wonder.
Thank you
Ed
for making
Jacobs.
this happen.
Of course,
Thank you
dude.
so much, Chris.
I love you,
Yeah,
buddy, and I'm glad we got to do
love
it.
you
And I
too.
just know it's going to crush. It's going to be great.
Thanks. Yeah,
Thanks for joining
can't
us,
wait.
Eddie. I love you, and I will see you whenever I see you, I guess, after this COVID shit is done. Fuck COVID. Yeah.